Hey, how you doing? It's Hamish from Phoenix Sound Recording Studio here. Today we are in my control room and we are going to do a mix walkthrough of the track Ain't My Weight by the band Redwood. This track was released just recently on the 28th of August 2020. It's a completely independent release. If you haven't already heard it, you can check it out here. So go and do that. If you like what you hear, go and pre-order their new album, Beside a Shallow Sun. We tracked that album in like January, February time this year, I think. Did all the instrumentation here at my studio, and then did all the vocals down at Alex, the singer's house. He just wanted a change of scenery, and we just kind of figured that was a sensible way to do it. Got us out of our kind of comfort zone, as it were, in here, and kind of allowed us a bit of a different kind of environment to work in and a bit more relaxed kind of approach to it. So what we'll do, there's quite a lot going on in this track, so I think what I'll do is I'll probably end up splitting it into a couple of things, but we'll start with drums, and then we'll do bass, and maybe that'll be one episode, and then we'll do guitars, that'll be another one, and vocals. If there's a chance to condense guitar and vocals, then we'll do that as well. We'll also have a quick dive into some of the kind of ambience and stuff that I usually and typically get given by Jamie, the guitarist of the band, who composes and produces all that kind of stuff himself. So, yeah, as you can see, I mean, if you've not heard the track, go and listen to it. If you have heard the track, as you well know, it's kind of a kind of big, kind of pop rocky kind of song. Pretty standard in terms of instrumentation. There's nothing like wild going on, but there's some cool little bits and pieces and some cool effects that we've done, and some cool bits of percussion and all that kind of stuff. So we'll just dive right in, and we'll start with the drums. So the purpose of this kind of track itself, I think we kind of always knew it was going to be up there with like a potential first single from this record, and we wanted to kind of go down the route of it being like as real and as natural sounding as possible, while kind of being as polished and kind of punchy and snappy as possible, without kind of over processing or like over killing any natural feel of the drums and everything else for that matter. But the drums is kind of always one of those bits that I think you can kind of go overboard on and kind of actually remove the sort of I guess the normality or the humanization of the drums. So we tried to keep it kind of sounding real, but we obviously wanted it to sound kind of competitive against everything else that's out there at the minute. And with these guys kind of moving more away from, I suppose, like the technical kind of mathy elements of what they used to do, to kind of trying to, I guess, kind of do some more sort of like traditional kind of song structure, poppy rock songs, then I think this was kind of the way we wanted to go. But it's a pretty typical for me drum setup. There's a couple other bits that I don't typically do, but we'll get into that and I'll explain why. But yeah, I'll play you what the drums sound like finished, and then we'll just dive in, and you can hear all of it. So I'll just play you from this chorus here. Cool. So kind of sounds like a loud, snappy drum kit. That's what we like. So yeah, we'll just dive in. We'll go through what we've got first. So yeah, we've got the kick sample, sub kick mic. That is a Beta 52A. The kick in sample is, I believe, one of my friend Lewis's. Let me just see what we've got. Oh no, it's not. I've used one of the Slate samples there. Sub kick mic, which is one that I made myself out of an old Wharfdale speaker that I had from some hi-fi speakers. That all gets bussed. We'll go into that. Then there's some sidechain, so we'll go into that as well. Then we've got the snare, like just the spot mic on the snare sample, snare bottom mic here. Then we've got that all gets bussed the same as the kick. Snare reverb, snare parallel compression, rack and floor. Then we come over, we've got the hi-hats, overhead left, overhead right. And then I did a mono overhead, which I don't normally do, and I wasn't going to use it for a while, and then I decided that there was something that I kind of wanted, and on a track-by-track basis, this is either in or not in the track. In this case, I left it in. Then there's a ride spot mic, a Meinl kind of effects crash spot mic / China. That cymbal switched between songs, so sometimes it was a China, sometimes it was this kind of dry Meinl crash that he's got, sometimes it was like one of those ozoned crashes for effects and stuff. Then we've got a room left, room right, and a room mono. That all then gets put into the overall drum bus, which is here, and then the drum bus gets parallel compressed as well. So we'll shoot back to the kick and we'll chop in. Oh yeah, the last thing as well is this, which is just some rim click stuff, which sounds similar to this. So the plan was to track everything and then come back and overdub that, and what ended up happening was we forgot. So I just took it from the demo. So that is just the demo rim clicks from the Logic Portland kit, and we kept it in. And I don't think I ended up doing anything to it apart from leveling it into the mix because it just sounded good. So that is that. So yeah, kick is a Beta 52A inside a 22 by 20 Mapex Saturn drum, kick drum, and it sounds. So I'll turn all the processing off, so you can just hear what the raw recording sounded like, and it sounds like this. Sounds like a mic and a kick drum. So that's that. The trigger sample that we've got is this. So that's kind of giving me all the like attack and smacky top end. And then the sub kick, which is essentially focused around like 48 hertz. This one, it's kind of picks up around that area, moving into 48 to 50. So it sounds like this. So yeah, that's all our sub stuff. So all of that, I'm pretty sure that's a Slate sample as well. Yeah, I think it's just one of the standard kicks that comes with Trigger 2 when you buy it. I just think it worked for this track, which is why I used it. I probably tried a couple. I typically go through maybe like 3 or 4 until I find one that I think is going to work for the track. So all of that then gets put into this drum bus. So every single one of those kicks sources comes straight into a drum bus. And in this case, I've started with the SSL G series channel. There's a little bit of EQ going on here. There's a gate and a bit of compression here as well. So EQ wise, pretty simple. I'm just chucking up a bit of the kind of just above 5k, and then boosting quite a lot around 100 on this. Remember, this is the overall kick, so this is just the complete kick sound in itself. So yeah, I'm just getting rid of some of that bleed and kind of just tightening it up in the EQ. And as you can see, just doing about 3 dB of gain reduction there. So not an awful lot going on. It's just really just tightening it up and keeping it all pretty consistent. I should mention as well that the source, so this kick drum here, was recorded through a DBX 160X, which is why it looks quite consistent. I mean, Toby's a consistent drummer anyway, but it's pretty consistent anyway. This was just to keep it all in check. And then running through an 1173 style preamp, the Golden Age Project's pre-73, just to give it a bit more like attack and punch. So that's what's going on there. So yeah, that's my first instance of compression. Then we run into a transient shaper. So this one here, I'm just adding a little bit more smack on the initial transient, and then the kick drum that I have, the Mapex one, is a little bit long in terms of like the note that it gives out. It gives out this kind of like hum, which no matter kind of how you tune it, like it just shifts the frequency. So even if you tune it slightly higher, the frequency of it just shifts up. It's kind of like it accentuates the fundamental, and it's kind of weird. So what I normally do is just roll off the decay of the kick drum just to kind of snap that and keep it in check. And with this song in particular, I just wanted the kick drum to be like in and out every time it hit. I didn't want any sort of like kind of nonsense afterwards, or any sort of space filler afterwards. So yeah, this just jumps in and jumps out. So I'll play it with and without. So you can hear it just kind of brings the kind of initial low end attack just forward a little bit, and then just trims it off quite neatly. You can just see here that it's just trimming it off quickly. So yeah, that's what's going on there. And we run into an EQ. Rolling off a lot of the like super low sub stuff here, and quite a lot of the kind of cymbal bleed that we've got there. Most of the attack from it is here in this kind of 3 to 4K region. This again is me trying to deal with that little fundamental note that I was saying. So it basically, if I play you the frequency so you can just hear it, let me just loop this section and I can play it through for you. So then if I boost it, just tidies it up a little bit. And then this here, if I turn all these off, you'll hear the difference. So it really, what I'm doing there is just removing all of the mid, so that I'm basically, the kick drum is essentially just all kind of low end and sub, and then all attack. This one here is removing quite a lot of like the higher part of the low frequencies. Now I wouldn't normally do something like this, but I just wanted the kick to really cut through, and the easiest way for me to do that was to get rid of the stuff that wasn't helping it cut over the rest of the bass. You'll realise in this track, if you haven't already listened to it, that the bass is a pretty focal part of this song, and throughout this record we really wanted the bass to kind of essentially be like the rhythm guitar. So it's very full frontal, and it has just a lot of information in it, and these two areas were kind of clashing up quite a lot between the two, so that's what's going on there. So yeah, I've left all my low, and then I've just boosted this high, kind of click and smack a bit more. So you can hear it just pull that high end up a little bit. Then this compressor, I am not using so much for compression as I am for the sonic quality that it adds to, for me, to low end kick drums and bass drums and that kind of stuff. It just kind of pushes this like tight roundness like just forward, and I appreciate that it's doing that through compression, but there's just something about the way that it sounds that I love on kicks and basses. So this is pretty much like a go-to for me, and it sounds like this. This is it without it, and I'll just punch it in. So it just kind of focuses it for me and maintains that low and really pushes it right in. And again, with this kick drum, I wanted it to be like punchy and smacky and tight and just like as focused as I could make it sound for this track. There's an awful lot of stuff going on in this track, and I needed everything to kind of cut just where it needed to be. So that's what's going on there. I followed that. This was a late addition. When I got the drum sitting where I wanted, and I thought that it was working with the bass and all the rest of it, and then when I kind of started adding all the vocals and everything else, and started kind of re-listening back after I'd kind of done my first pass on a mix of it, I still felt like I wasn't quite getting the like click of the snare drum through, of the kick drum through. So I came back and added this Saturn, which you can see in the high mid, I'm really driving some distortion in there, and then on the top end I'm driving a fair amount of distortion. And I think, yeah, I kind of like default set this just at the bottom end, just so that it kind of all like smooths itself out and doesn't sound like I've just over accentuated the highs too much. And that without it sounds like this, and then with it, so it kind of just re-adds that like barkiness and the kind of knockiness of the top end that is not like horrible to listen to and doesn't become particularly fatiguing, but it just helps push it over the rest of it. So that's what's going on there. And then just to make sure that like at no point in the track I've just dumped this limiter on the top, because I think a couple of bits like down here we kind of dive into a couple of bits in the verses here, and he kind of pushes his kick a little bit through. So this was just to make sure it just didn't clip out. So there's nothing crazy going on there. It's just literally knocking it off so it doesn't go into the red. And then that whole bus then gets put into this parallel compression, which if I play on its own sounds like this. So just a lot of like high-end smack and kind of like energy, and it's less about like the sonic, it's more just about pushing the speakers a bit more, pushing a bit more air through. So yeah, together, if I get rid of it and then I'll punch it in. So yeah, you can really hear that it just pulls it right forward. And for that, I literally have always just kind of favoured this Logic's kind of thing. I have it on a super like limiting ratio, and then basically it's at -33 on this. No makeup gain. It's actually got a -12 gain on it just to keep it in check. And then fastest attack and fastest release and the hardest knee. I also run this distortion circuitry, and then I just set the limiter to -0.4 just to make sure that I'm just absolutely keeping it in check. And it's as simple as that. And that for me is pretty much my go-to for kick drums. Occasionally I'll use the FG Stress from Slate, but this for me is, it always, to my ear, is just what I want it to be. So that's what's going on there. So yeah, that's my kicks. So again, I'll just play them without all that processing, and then with it so you can hear it. So there's your kick drum. Okay, so if we dive into snares, again, so with this, I think what I ended up doing here is, so typically this would be the same as kicks. It would run all of them into the same bus, which is obviously what I started doing here, and then decided that I didn't want to do that, which is why this snare channel still exists, but it literally just has the raw snare file going into it. So what I will have ended up doing is processing everything together, deciding that I didn't necessarily like it, and then reopening up these channels. This one just runs directly to the snare, the full drum bus, and then this one is just going to a stereo output. It's not even going through the drums. And I think that is because I needed it to be there for some of the ghost notes and stuff on the underside of the snare. I didn't want it to be gated, so there's no gating going on that. And if I ran it through the drum bus, it just pulled up all of the excess kind of unwanted bleed that you get from the rest of the drum kit a bit too much. So what I just decided to do was just run it straight into the stereo output, so you still have it there, but it's not interacting with any of the other compressors that is going through the drum stuff, so it's not just like pulling up all the noise that I don't particularly want. So snare wise, snare top, if I take off all the processing on this channel here, so yeah, this is how the snare drum sounds raw. So there's that ring on it. Again, kind of just typical of that snare drum. It's a Black Panther steel, like metal shelled, very ringy, quite shallow snare drum. But we wanted to use it because it tunes quite high, and for this track we wanted that kind of that high tuning. So that's why I used that. And you'll notice that I pretty much kind of get rid of the ring out of this snare drum, because I decided that once I'd processed it, it was not kind of quite right, and then I've re-added it with this drum sample, so we'll get onto that. I'll play the drum sample now. The drum sample sounds like this, and then you've got the under snare that sounds like this, and without that. So that's it raw. Just sounds like a mic on the bottom of a snare drum. It's one of the least pleasing sounds of all time. So yeah, so we've got this snare drum. This then runs into this bus, which we are gating. I just use the Pro G from FabFilter. So as you can hear, I'm keeping it short. Got a very, very tight hold and quite short release. The attack's as quick as possible. It's got a super minute liquor head. I'm not entirely sure. When I opened this earlier and looked at it, I couldn't remember why I'd turned this on and barely used it, but I think it might have just been I'd like convince myself that it was just allowing them to catch the gate just quite right on the snares, but ultimately I'm not sure it's really doing that. And then I brought the range back down a bit, so there is still like a bit of natural bleed, so it doesn't just like get that kind of like sound when it opens. So that is just allowing like enough of the bleed from the recording back through, so that you're still getting the kind of cymbal crashes and a bit of the hi-hat, but it's taming it quite a lot. So that's what's going on there. Then again, we're back with the wave smack attack, just knocking off a bit of it just to kind of, again, same with the kick drum. I kind of wanted this in and out, and I was going to get my kind of spatial part of the snare from the reverb that I use, and also from the room mic. So this has just got a load of front end attack being pushed through it, and then just a really quick duck in the decay of it. So that sounds like this. and without it. So you can hear it's just pushing it a little bit forward. Snare wise, not an awful lot going on here. This is the ring that I was talking about that I tried to get rid of. So if we open this up, I should be able to show you it. Yeah, so I'm dropping it pretty far down, so if I play it and I'll boost it and you'll be able to hear what I'm cutting here. So that's what's going on there. I'm just getting rid of that. Small amount of top end boost just to give it that bit more of a smack. And then this whole section here with this snare drum, there's a good like 5 or 6 resonant frequencies in this area that aren't annoying enough to want to surgically remove all of them. But after you start compressing the snare and stuff, they start pulling them back up and you start noticing them more and more. So what I typically do if I'm using this is just do like a kind of broad dip here. I think in this instance it's probably 3.5 dB, just to kind of soften those down so that when you do compress it and bring the level back up, they're kind of at a neutral position as opposed to being like in your face and kind of in the way. So that's what's going on there. I'm then distorting this snare drum with the satin, and again this will probably be nothing in the mids, nothing in the lows, and quite a lot in that whole kind of high mids and top end. So I'll play it without it and then I'll push it back in. So yeah, it's really just like giving it a bit more extra kind of like grit on the top end. And then we've got the SSL channel again here, which I believe, so we've got a bunch of EQ going on here. There may be some compression going on, so let's have a look. Yeah, okay, so we're definitely getting towards the snare sound here. So we're doing about -5, -6 dB of gain reduction here. We've got loads of top end. I think this is about 11K. And then we've got 7 dB of gain boost there. Here we are ducking out 1K. There was something going on there that if I boosted it, I'll be able to tell you what it was that I didn't like, but it's a pretty broad sweep in that area, so yeah. So that's essentially like, I always describe it as this like papery sound. It kind of sounds like someone's put a sheet of paper on top of the snare drum and is hitting it, and it just kind of, it's just not very pleasing. And then I've boosted 200, which is like where the fundamental body of the snare sits here, and that's obviously on the bell setting so that it's not just lifting all the other nonsense below it. So that is just a smooth bell in that area. So without that, it sounds like this, and with it, cool. And then with the bottom snare, so if I add these two things together, you get this. So without gating the bottom snare and allowing it to go through just straight through to the stereo output, for me it is just kind of like refilling in the gap that's left from gating the snare, but it allows it to kind of not overcompensate for that gap that's left and give you this kind of horrible wash that you don't necessarily need or want. And it just smooths it out and kind of keeps it sounding natural without being kind of overbearing on your ears. So that's the raw snare processing. And then with the sample, it sounds like this. So the snare sample is a Lewis Johns sample. He's a friend of mine. If you don't know him, check out his work. He works at Ranch Production House in Southampton here in the UK. And this is his Brady. Well, I'm not sure it's his actually. I think it might be his housemates, but they went and recorded it, and he sent it to me to try out. So that's what we've got going on here. Obviously, you get far more samples within the pack that you can buy from his website, but I just wanted these ones. So we've got a room mic, an overheads, snare top and bottom, and then I've just blended those accordingly. The room at the ranch sounds awesome. It sounds, well, I'll play it to you. It sounds like this. And the overheads just brings that smack back in, and then cool. And then with this, it's just getting a bunch of bottom end, so the kind of 200 hertz, a bunch of top end just to get that like crack back in, and then again, this is that kind of papery sound in the 1K area that I don't really like, and that's pretty standard for most snare drums that I record. And then there was the ring of the snare drum here, but if I left it in, and then when I started kind of pushing it through the parallel compression, it became overbearing. So again, similar with the last snare drum with all those individual frequencies, I just kind of put this bit on it to bring it down by a few dB, so that when you bring it back up, kind of puts it at a neutral level. So that's what's going on there. And then I've just got rid of all the low end stuff that's in it because it's eating up headroom, and the super top end because again it was eating up headroom. This is then being distorted again, bit of top end distortion, loads of mid-range distortion, and nothing on the bottom end. So I'll play it without both of these, and then I'll punch them both in for you. Cool. And then the last thing on snare is these two bus ends. So these are being sent there. This is a parallel compression and a reverb, which then show up here. So the parallel compression, very similar but different model. So it's still the same Logic compressor that I use. I just used this classic VCA because it kind of grits up a little bit nicer when you put that distortion circuit in. And it's a bit more kind of like full frontal attacky, so I use this on snare just because it allows the snare to cut through a little bit more, but it's very similar. So we're on -31 on the threshold, limiting ratio again at 22:1, and then got that -12 dB of auto gain off, and then just the hard distortion setting, and again limiting at 0.2, -0.2, and that on its own sounds like this. And then the reverb is the Verb Tweet Classics by Slate, and I use this CLA preset because it sounds incredible, and I think presets are there to be used. In this instance, I think I barely changed anything, apart from I added a bit more high end, and I think I pushed the low end a tiny bit more. Normally I'd experiment with the chorus and the width and stuff, but again, this just kind of worked, so I just left it as was, and I just, I think even the timing of the reverb was kind of where I wanted it to be, so I left it. And that reverb on its own sounds like this. And then when you punch it back in with everything else, this is the snare sound. So essentially the sample is doing all the kind of heavy lifting on the top end, the raw snare is doing all the pushing on the bottom end. This is kind of keeping it natural from the bottom of the snare. It's kind of giving you all that rattle and stuff that you want, which is why it's then going straight to the stereo output, so it's not getting like over processed. And then all of it's being sent through to the parallel compression and the reverb. And yeah, so if I put that in with the kick as well, this is your kick and snare. So yeah, sounds like that. Rack and floor. Cool. So again, very similar processing for both rack and floor. Again, you'll see both got gates, both got transient designer, both are going through an EQ, both are being distorted, and then these will most likely be compressors. And then I think I will have just done a bit more surgical EQ on the floor tom just to remove, typically what this is to remove any like real like low end kind of woofy resonant frequency that's kind of been accentuated through all the other channels processing. So if we listen to it without them, so yeah, gate, pretty simple. Both will be pretty similar settings, pretty short release, super fast attack, short hold, hard knee. Again, that look ahead is the same as the snare, so I obviously decided that there was something right going on there. And then these are being filtered just by the frequencies, so they're being triggered by the frequency that's like kind of around their fundamental tones, just to ensure that like a snare hit doesn't knock it off, or a cymbal hit or something doesn't like allow it to just, especially with the rack tom, when someone hits like the crash, that can typically open the gate, and you get like that like psh sound that you don't really want, especially if in this instance I'm distorting it and stuff. It just really messes with that kind of stuff there. So that's what's going on there. And then the range is almost nothing, so there's a tiny little bleed coming through there just to make it sound a bit more natural. And then floor tom wise, yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same, but I've left a little bit more of the bleed open, and again filtering based entirely on its fundamental frequencies. So that, as you heard, sounds like that. This will be a bunch of front end. Yep. And on the floor tom, it looks like I'm removing, yeah. So this one's the rack. Both got very similar push on the initial attack, just to really give it that smack. So yeah, as you can hear, it's just pulling it right up and forward on both of those. The floor tom, again, this is me trying to tackle that like low end frequency that's just there. That is just rolled off pretty heavily and on that very sharp curve out, just to kind of get it out of the way as quick as possible, so that it's not just like rumbling on in your right hand ear. Especially if you're listening on headphones or something, if there's a floor tom that's just kind of like you start to notice it over everything else. So that's what's going on there. I got rid of that. And then again, this is just ducking out the same sort of thing, but on the rack. And I typically find that for the rack tom, I don't really get it so much. So yeah, it's not doing quite as much, and it's also not got quite as steep a curve on the way out. So yeah, that's what's going on there. And then this is essentially going to be all my EQ, I think. So let's have a look here. So it looks like I'm compressing on the rack and not on the floor, and then yeah, most of my tom EQ is happening through this. So we've got, if we start with the rack, they'll be fairly similar, just the slight frequency alterations per drum. So a bunch of 5 to 6K here. We've got 6 dB boost in the top end there. I am removing an awful lot here, 11 dB of 70 hertz by the looks of things. So let's see what that sounds like. Yeah. So there's just a resonant frequency in there that I didn't like, so I'm just getting rid of that. And that's again on a narrow Q, just so that I'm focusing in just on that area. And then big boost, 6 dB at 89, 90 hertz, just to give that low end back in. Cool. And then again on the on the floor, it'll be pretty similar. Yeah. So again, we've got another 5K, 6 dB boost. This one I'm boosting at the 4.5 kilohertz. Oh, it's 5 kilohertz again. So yeah, 12 dB boost. Yeah, so I'm just I'm chucking a lot through on that kind of 4 to 5K area there, and then we've got minus 6 dB in the 1.4K, and it's again, this is kind of a fairly wide curve on this one, so there was obviously some nonsense there that I didn't really want. Normally that looks like it's going to be in the kind of mid frequency that I don't like, the fundamental tones within the mid frequency, and then this is why I've then distorted it, because I do want the kind of barkiness from that area, but I typically find that for me, if I just were to boost it, you end up with all of these tones that aren't, to my ear, particularly pleasing, whereas if you distort the frequencies in that area, all the additional harmonics that it gives you within the distortion are more pleasurable to listen to than the fundamentals. So the fundamentals get dipped out, and then I add a bunch of distortion to that dip, which kind of neutralizes it, but gives you the harmonics that for me are more pleasurable to listen to. So that sounds like this. So yeah, we're getting there. And then these will both just be compression, I think. Yeah, so they're both just the FG stress, and they'll be just adding as much kind of like both volume, but also just like the kind of initial like punch that the distressor kind of gives you, and the sort of like the crushing energy that they kind of give you. So that sounds like this. Again, you know, medium slow attack, and super fast release, just so I'm not like hanging on those the kind of ringing note of each drum. I think this one will be, yeah. So I mean the release is at 0 on this, so I mean it's not holding it at all. It's just doing that initial impact. And then again on the floor tom, I imagine that this is, yeah, so that's that fundamental frequency. I'm just ducking that out, and then again just ducking out a bunch of the stuff I didn't want here, which is kind of the like knocky low mid. So I'll turn them off and on. So it's just kind of rounding them out, making them sound a bit more tight and a bit more like even. And then these both get sent to a stereo parallel compression, which will be set very, very similar to the kick. So 22 to 1, around 30 to 33, no makeup gain, 12 dB lost, fastest attack, fastest release, hardest knee, and again that hard distortion setting, and minus 0.2 on the limiter. It sounds like this. So yeah, if I put all of these in, you'll be able to hear what this field sounds like all together. So I'll give you a little bit of a pre-roll. So yeah, that's what that sounds like. Overheads wise, I think on this I ended up doing very little actually. I think I just liked the way they sounded, so I'll kind of give you the chorus here, and you can we'll jump into that. So yeah, I mean, sounds like overheads. It's going to be, yep, an instance of compression. I imagine I'm probably doing about 2 dB of gain reduction here. Yeah. And it's really only affecting the snare drum just to kind of pull it down in those initial overheads, just to kind of smooth everything out so that it doesn't sound like it's kind of jumping in and out when every time the snare hits, you kind of get this burst of like snare sound. So that's just to smooth it all out so that it all just kind of sounds like it's that. You've kind of got like a block of that frequency range essentially, and then an EQ, and this is pretty much just a surgical thing. I'm getting rid of all the kind of knocking subbiness from the kick in the room that I didn't really want. Again, this here, that's an interesting one, and it's because of one of the cymbals that he has, and I'll explain it in a minute. And then this is all just surgical to get rid of ringing, so I'll play them and I'll turn them up so you can hear what I'm getting rid of here. So yeah, just all the horrible nastiness that you don't really want. I obviously then decided I didn't want that either. And then this is, yeah, so he has a Meinl like double-fired dark kind of crash ride, which sounds awesome for like accents and kind of hitting like with the snare drum. It just has this really cool kind of like trashy sound, but it also has this like really weird kind of strange frequency inside it. I suppose it's kind of, I guess, like the low mids of the cymbal is the easiest way I would describe it. Like the kind of bottom end sound of it is a bit too like almost gong-like and just is dominating when it's been hit. So that is just to kind of scoop that out. And so that's what's going on there. So yeah, nothing crazy. And in terms of overheads, everything, my hi-hats, my overhead left and right, my overhead mono, and then the ride spot and the Meinl spot all get sent into that single bus there. So the only other thing of processing on the overheads is this mono overhead, which is the Aston Origin I think I was using, which looks... Okay, so that makes sense. So that's what's going on there. So this one had a much more pleasurable kind of kick focus. So where I said that I was getting rid of the stuff here, that was to make room for this. So this I didn't feel like had the focus I wanted it on the kick, and then the overhead mono did. So what I've done is accentuated all the kick on the overhead mono and all of the kind of snare body on the overhead mono, and then I've just kind of brightened up and kind of made it a bit more crunchy on the top end as well, just to kind of smooth that whole process out. and then that all gets blended in with the other overheads. So that all together sounds like this. So yeah, that's your overheads. And then what we've got left is my room mics and my room mono. So my room mics, I think I just used on this just two SEX ones that I basically have about 6 foot away, left and right of the drums, behind baffle boards and pointed at the floor. I have a wooden, kind of laminate wooden floor that sends quite a lot of the like vibration energy through the drums, through the floor. So I like to try and get the kind of vibration and the energy from that back up into the mics. It's like a Steve Albini trick where he tapes the mics to the floor. I've done it and it doesn't sound particularly nice in this room, but I did find that pointing them at the floor in this room gives me the same kind of thing. Putting them behind baffles is just to knock off the really like pinchy high frequencies from the cymbals. And then yeah, so this will probably be like kind of distorted, and I will have probably crushed it on the way in a little bit as well, so they sound like this. And then they ended up sounding like this. It's basically just filling all of the kind of roomy space. So we've got a lot of compression going on here, loads going into the compressor. It's on the hardest ratio, and this 1176, quickest attack and quickest release. It's just set at full mix, and then I've just brought it down in volume on the output by quite a lot here as well. I've removed loads of the top end stuff and loads of the kind of top, like end of the mids, beginning of the tops. I brought all that down as well. Again, that's just to kind of tame the cymbals. So, I mean, if I turn them off, just kind of almost moves them away from the drum kit slightly, so kind of giving it more of a room sound, like it was a bit further away in a bigger room. And then yeah, I've boosted a bunch of 600 here and boosted a bunch of 200, and that is essentially just to kind of give, like, this is a bit of the kind of knockiness that I quite liked in the room, and then this is just as much snare body as I could possibly get, and then this is just kind of smashing it into a bunch of saturation just to give it a bunch of distortion and more energy. So if I turn this off, it sounds like this. So it is being distorted by the compressor, and then I've just accentuated that again with the this Slate New York style tube collection sort of saturation portion of a mixing console. And then the very last thing I have is this room mic, which sounds like this with no processing on it. And then this when it's processed. So this is what I started doing probably at the end of last year. I got a Neumann TLM 103, and I would face it against one of the brick walls in the studio, and then I would put a reflection filter around the back of it, so it was getting all of the kind of like immediate rebound from the kick and snare off the bricks and the toms, and then was also being protected from the cymbals by the baffle, if that makes sense. So the sound was like hitting the baffle, and then the cymbals would kind of get absorbed by that and not hit the brick and come back into it, but the kick and snare and the toms would hit the brick and come back into it. So essentially what I'm trying to do there is be able to crush it without bringing up too much of the high end, and I probably have taken the high end out here as well. Yeah, or I've added a little bit, and I've taken out a lot of the like really pinchy stuff here, and I've also taken out a lot of the top end there. So this will have gone into my, if I can remember rightly, I think I probably put it through. I have LA 610 Mark II Universal Audio tube preamp with the tube compressor built into it. So it will have gone into the preamp and then straight into the compressor, and it will have just been crushed the hell out of by the compressor, which is why it's kind of distorted before any of this goes on it, and why it's just super flatlined here as well. I'm then compressing it even more on an even harder ratio, and then just adding a little bit of EQ here as well. So if I remove these, So what I'm trying to do here is remove the super high top end, just bring it down so that it's kind of a bit more tame, and then just put the kind of nice part of the top end back in, and then again scoop even more of the kind of really pinchy sort of high mids out. Everything else is just kind of left flat as it comes, so that's all that's going on there. So yeah, that is all the drums. When they go into the drum bus, they then sound like this. Well, they don't. They sound like this. And then just to kind of glue it all together, it's been sent into this vintage style tube compressor, which is doing probably about 3 or 4 dB of gain reduction. So it's pushing down to like almost 3 dB on the snare hits, just to really tame it back. It has a, like a fast-ish attack and release, but not anything crazy, and then a tiny bit of makeup gain on that as well. It's then running into some saturation, a little bit of EQ, some top end, and then I'm just trimming it to keep the gain down a little bit again there. So if I remove these EQs, but I'll leave the saturation on. So you can see with the saturation, it's essentially just kind of giving a bit of a like softer kind of top end like blow on the snare hits. And then if I reintroduce this Neve style EQ, so that is about 2 dB of like around 5k, and again probably 2 dB of the like top end shelf of that Neve EQ, and then pushing a bunch of 60 hertz through as well, just to kind of really give it that like full force behind the kick in the lower end of the snare. And then again just a one odd dB of just like the pure kind of high end brilliance from the Slate Air EQ, and then I'm just taming all of that, bringing it down 7 dB just so that it's not peaking and not clipping. And then I am limiting it. That way it's just absolutely not punching itself into anywhere that it doesn't need to be. It's a very small amount of limiting on that, and it's just simply just to kind of level it out and make sure that it just doesn't go into the red at any point. And then the last thing that gets done, I've then in parallel compressed the entire kick bus, the entire drum bus, which sounds like this on its own. And as you can see, it's doing a lot. There's quite a lot of input going in there. I'm trying to push as much in as I possibly can so that I can really like lock it down. It's got a sort of medium fast attack, super fast release, and then I just trimmed it with the output there. And then again, this just gets blended in with the actual drum kit. So if I play it, I'll play the drums without it, and then I'll punch it in and you'll see what it's doing. So yeah, and then those are your drums. So yeah, if we move on to bass, we can take a look at that. Okay, cool. So we will just dive into bass. So again, 2 kind of bass tones in this track. We've got, I'd say clean. It's not clean, but like the clean tone, and then the kind of chorus and distorted tone. So the clean tone sounds like this. Let me just, cool. And then the distorted tone sounds like this. So yeah, Connor is a very hard bass player. He proper slams his strings, which is why all of his bass always sounds super energetic and kind of top endy, which for this band works beautifully. He knows when to dial it back, which is important, but for this song, I mean, it's principally the kick and bass are what are like driving this song the entire time, so it's pretty essential that they were kind of aggressively played, and he did a very good job of that. So the setup was the same for both tones. It was an orange 4x10 and my Ampeg SVT3 Pro, and then a couple of different pedal options depending. So I think for the slightly cleaner tone, it will have been the Dark Glass Electronics B3K stomp box that they've got, and then for the distorted tone, it will have still been the B3K, but we borrowed my friend Josh from Palm Readers Fuzzrocious bass fuzz. I can't remember the name, but it's like a white pedal with a black Fuzzrocious logo on the top of it, which is just like a wild sounding pedal. So yeah, and then the setup was basically my kind of go-to is a 421 and a Beta 52A. Beta 52A kind of deals with the lower end and the lower end focus, and then the 421 typically has this kind of like kind of barky, gritty, kind of mid to high end, like mid-range to high end sort of thing, and finding a blend between those is typically my go-to. And on this occasion, I decided to throw in the Aston Origin as well, just to kind of give it this like, my attempt was to kind of give it this like overall kind of rounded sound. So the 421 and the 52 are kind of next to one another on one of the cones, and then the Aston is on a different cone and slightly further back to allow the whole kind of sound to be a bit more rounded. So if I play them individually, you'll hear what's going on here. So that's the 41. That's the 52. So yeah, you can hear that kind of has a bit more of like the low end, sort of low mid kind of roundness to it. So what I've done is basically I just tracked them all together, and then leveled them how I wanted, and then all of that runs to an individual like clean or like main bass bus, which gets a little bit of processing before heading to the overall, like both bass tones get put into this bass bus here, and then they get a slightly bit more processing done to them there. So yeah, that's what's going on there. And again, as I say, it's a Sterling by Music Man active bass, which sounds great, as you can hear. It's played really tightly, and then all of that runs into the SVT and then into an orange cabinet, and then it's these microphones here, and then the setup is exactly the same for the like gritty version of it. That then all gets bussed into its own grit bus, and then that then gets bussed back into the dual bass bus that we have over here. So what we've got going on is a bit of EQ. So on this kind of like clean bus sound, so it's boosting a little bit of the sub frequency that I felt like was slightly lacking. It's getting rid of the kind of like real crackly stuff that the amp tends to push through. My amp is quite old, and as much as like Ampeg have that nice kind of gritty top end, when they get older they seem to start pushing some other kind of partial noise through that you don't necessarily want so much. So that's always kind of in this area, so I just tame that by knocking it off. What have we got here? So that looks like it's going to be a whistly frequency. Yeah. That's just cleaning up a bit more of the top end. Again, here I'm just taming the like real pick bite that you get. And then just reducing the kind of mids, lower mids here, just to tighten up the whole bass tone. So without that, it sounds like this. So it just kind of gets rid of that woofiness that kind of starts eating up some of the other areas of the track that we don't want to lose. So that's what's going on there. And then I am giving it a bit of saturation on, so the mids, the like high mids, is getting a lot of saturation put through it. So without it, so it's reintroducing that pick attack but in a slightly nicer way than just EQing some more of that frequency range in. So yeah, that's it. There's nothing else going on. It's just a blend of those three mics and those two very simple bits of processing. And then again, it's a very simple situation. Again, same sort of thing. So some saturation and some EQ. Again, with the added distortion, there's a lot more kind of top end noise that you want to be careful of when you're working with bass distortion. So if I turn this EQ off and play you part of this kind of chorus here, let's see what we've got going on. Yeah. So that's it with no processing. And then if I put the EQ back in, so yeah, it's just kind of getting rid of the fizziness that I didn't really want. And then when he hits some of those higher notes, there's a couple of whistly frequencies that I've taken out just with these little notches. So that's all that's going on there. And then it's being distorted again here, and it'll be a lot of mid-range distortion, I'd imagine. Yeah, mid-range, no top end, because again, that's what we've just taken away. So mid-range and then no low end, and that sounds like this without it, and then I'll punch it in. So it's kind of just distorting that upper mid, especially when he hits those top notes, but it's also giving a bit more kind of detail and clarity to the subbier, like lower notes that he's doing. So that is, again, all that's happening with that. Then when it gets bussed, both of those tones then get bussed to their own bass kind of master bus here. A little bit more EQ, and then some compression. So again, the EQ here, I'm just taming all of that buzziness that I don't want, looking after the low mids and the mid frequencies here, and just rolling off some more top end. So I'll play it without it, and then I'll play it with it. I'll get rid of this compression as well for now. So that's with no EQ. So it's just kind of smoothing it all out. It's just taking away all of the like muddiness that I found in this kind of area, and then it's just dropping the peaks down on some of those proper like pokey bits where he's hitting the kind of higher strings and really picking it out. And then again, just taking care of all of that kind of nastiness that the amp seems to put out. So that's what's happening there. And then this is like my go-to, the 1176 style compressor, and then straight into the kind of LA2A style compressor. Again, a pretty fast attack and a pretty fast release, and then a pretty basic ratio, and then I run that into a compressor that has a much slower attack and release, and between the two of them it just kind of develops this big kind of like rounded, very focused bass sound. So if I play it with neither of them and then I'll punch them both in at the same time, they don't work individually. You have to have them at these settings together, otherwise you don't get the sound. So yeah, and then just so you've got it on the cleans as well. So yeah, it just really gives that like low end bloom, which I'm going for, which I like. And then again, similar to the overall bus compression, this gets parallel compressed as well, just to really like lock down the kind of the dynamics a little bit more, just so that you get this like real thick kind of chunky. As I said earlier, like we were going for the bass to kind of almost be the rhythm guitar in this. So again, like I wanted it to just be like omnipresent the whole way through the track. So very similar as we've seen with the drums, same on pretty much everything, slightly less ratio, but still pretty high, 20:1. Fastest attack, fastest release, hardest knee, keeping the gain down there, and then again that hard distortion circuitry, and then the limiter just keeping it in check. So I'll play it without and then I'll play it with. So this is without it. So again, it's just further developing that low end. And then if I play you, I guess, the bass and the drums all together. So yeah, that's where we got to with this. So I will see you in the next one for all the guitars and potentially all the vocals. And yeah, we should finish this track up. All right, see you next time. Cheers.